Hello there. Today we are going to talk about how to start designing LARPs. LARP design is a craft of making engaging experiences through emergent stories. Our task as designers is to encourage behavior that leads towards the experience we want our players to have. We can do that by designing and combining components such as, but not limited to, workshops, costume guides, character descriptions, mechanics, and narrative structures. Before we begin getting into the meat of designing a component, we should always have a solid idea of what it is we want to make. This step is important because it will be our compass and guide us through most of our design choices. Let's say that you and I are designing a LARP. We have found a nice replica village somewhere in the Swedish forests, and we have decided we want to make a long-form LARP there. First, we have the idea to make something about 7th century soldiers returning home from war. But the emphasis on the soldiers will create a weird focus on a limited amount of characters, risking that other characters such as their families will end up in side roles. So instead we reframe and broaden the concept. Our LARP will be about a 7th century village healing from years of war. While the soldiers were away, the villagers was terrorized by the enemy. The villagers are now trying to rebuild, while the soldiers with scars on both their body and mind are returning home to the families they left behind. The core of the experience is about coming together to deal with trauma and finding hope after a disaster. Once we have a clear idea of the experience we want to make, we can boil the design of components down to 3 steps. Step 1. Identify the experience and feeling you want to invoke in your players. Step 2. Identify behaviors that leads to said experiences and feelings. Step 3. Create components that encourages those behaviors. Let's start with a simple example. We want the players to feel like they are in the 17th century. A well-known player behavior that helps me maintain suspension of disbelief is to wear a costume. For this LARP, the players should look like they are characters from the 17th century. We will create a costume guide that instructs our players in what costumes to bring. It should contain stuff like colors and material, but we should also address the degree of authenticity. I tend to prefer the more relaxed, cool authentic. What do you think? We of course want to offer as much help as we can. So we also point towards shops and sewing patterns in our community we know are available. We can also make an online space where players can try to crowdsource costumes, for example from other players or other members of our community. If you follow our costume guide, you will dress more like someone from the 17th century. And if you dress more like someone from the 17th century, then you will feel more like someone from the 17th century. Our final design will of course need more design components. And I got another example. This one is going to get a bit more messy in step 3. Step 1. We want our players to experience the weight of bad war memories. Step 2. We could have the characters relive and enact those memories during the LARP. Step 3. This part of the process is often iterative and gets a little messy. Memory scenes could be cool, but we need to find a good way to put them into an otherwise linear LARP. We could use NPCs for this, but that would be resource heavy, and maybe instead we could try to find a way to use other players. I think it would be very cool to have scenes about soldiers invading homes. Maybe our soldier characters could play as invaders and the rest of the villagers as the victims in their homes. To do that, we would need to add at least 1 degree of meta abstraction, right? To the soldiers, the homes that they are invading are not of their own village, but instead representing places that they went during the war. And to the villagers, the soldiers coming into their homes are not their friends or family. They are instead foreign invaders. We would need to do something to maintain the suspension of disbelief and avoid confusion. Maybe we can make sure that the soldiers never play these scenes with their own family or anyone they have a close relationship to. That would create a puzzle problem we have to solve later, but maybe that would be good enough. I think you get the drift. I could go on and provide more examples, but now it's your turn. Throw me a comment with the design component you would create for this LARP. Our final design will be made out of many components. And when we have a rough idea of everything we think we will need, it's time to start weaving it all together. To make these component interface, we probably have to adjust them and iterate many times. In our memory example before, We will have to think about how the scenes play together with the character descriptions. Will we put the memory prompts into the written material? We will also need to think about how we will address these memories during the workshops and how they fit into the linearity of the narrative. The takeaway is that LARP design is an iterative process, and it is important that you learn from your own ideas and have fun while you do it. Go out and get started with those LARP designs I know you have already thought about. Knowing if a design component will work can be very hard. When you get semi-confident and you think you have something good, then the best way to find out is to playtest it. And we will dive into that soon. Until then, stay safe.